Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo Crew, before we drop into today's episode, I wanted to take a moment to invite you to a free workshop that I'm offering on January 14th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. How we begin is so important. How we begin our days, our weeks, our months, and our years sets the tone for our lives. And while each and every day is a new beginning, there is an extra potency in the new calendar year that we can harness. And one of the most powerful practices in my life has been rediscovering the sacred in all the mundane aspects of life. Doing this has allowed me to re-imbue my world with meaning and magic and has truly been life-changing. And I can't possibly keep all this wonder to myself, and so I am inviting you to join me for a Sacred Start workshop. I designed this workshop to help you create a sacred start to your year through daily ritual so that you can move through 2025 with intention and clarity. The workshop will be recorded, of course, for anyone who is unable to attend live, and as an added bonus, you can upgrade your experience to include a guided journey to connect with your animal and plant allies for 2025. This process connects you more deeply with the wisdom and support offered to you by the more than human world. I hope to see you there. I hope you'll join me. As always, the link for the Sacred Start workshop on January 14th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard is linked below in the show notes. Hello, Woo Crew, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I'm joined today by a beautiful guest, Janine Hauck. Janine lives in Alberta with me, which is really exciting because it's such a little tiny part of the world, well, a large geographic part of the world, but a tiny part of the world from a population perspective. So Janine is an energy empowerment coach with a gift for spotting those sneaky subconscious blocks that keep us stuck. She's mastered the art of clearing out energetic clutter so that you can tap into your full potential and reach new heights. If you know you are meant to live more than an average life, you are in the right place. And I am so delighted to welcome Janine on to the podcast today. Hello.
Hello. It's so good to
Kicking my table.
Oh my God. We're already bringing down the room. This is the kind of episode we're having today. It's so great to get to be here and have this conversation with you.
Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you for being my guest and being on. And as we were chatting about before we hopped in to record, this is going to be an open-ended conversation, as they all are. But I'm always so curious because of my own journey into spirituality and the woo and witchcraft, which we're going to touch on. I'm also curious about other people's journeys. Were you always spiritual? What brought you to the work you do? Like, how do those two stories intertwine?
Oh, that is such a good question. No, I wasn't into the spiritual. I mean, I was a person who loved magic. And I think a lot of the people who are into the spiritual now will find that in their childhood and stuff, they loved magic. They were probably a big fan of Harry Potter and all those magical things. But I didn't actually start that journey until in my very, very small town, there was a lady teaching a Connect with Your Angels class and Communicate with Your Angels class. And so I just like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to try it. And to give you a bit of a picture of where I was at that time, I would have been newly married. I'm married for almost 10 years now. And I remember my husband, because we both grew up Catholic, we both grew up in those Catholic structures, those very strong beliefs of this is
Mm-hmm.
good and this is bad. And I had told my husband that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do this. And right away he was like, no, no, no. Like inside himself, he was having the battle of like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to know about this. And for me, it was just a thing
Mm-hmm.
of how cool is it that we have this opportunity? How cool is it that we get to try an experience like this? And I give my husband so, so much credit, because it felt like an attack to him, because it was an attack to all that he knew and how he was
Mm-hmm.
raised. And his fear was like, well, what if you connect with dark beings? What if you connect to these negative energies? And so,
Right.
because like I respect him so much for this, even to this day, what he said is like, you go. If this is something that you're feeling like you need to do, you go and do it. Just don't tell me about it. So it wasn't like, I'm going to hold you back because of my fear. He's like, just go. And for me, like, that's just a lesson that I've really like taken from his book, like seeing with so much respect how you can just, he let me do my path and he let himself have his own pace. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the pebble that like started the ripple, where I started getting breadcrumbs in front of breadcrumbs of like being called further and further into my purpose. And it's so interesting looking back.
Mm-hmm.
I was really given very digestible pieces at the beginning because those felt like big pieces to me. But
Right.
so I was really met where I was at. And I was a hairdresser at that time. So that was my career of choice. And I had my first daughter. I was about to have my second, and I was called. And it's like, you need to be doing online. You need to get online. And so I was guided to teach moms how to braid their daughter's hair online. And so
Hmm.
that was the baby steps. When I mean, like, I was given like little steps. I was like, I was still being shown connected to the world that I knew and familiar. I was very fortunate not to be given the initiation of let's burn it all down and start from scratch, because I know that is quite a few people's spiritual journeys. So I was
Yeah.
so grateful that I was not put through that trial. And then I just kept getting put that next breadcrumb in front, that next breadcrumb in front, to the point where like last year I went to Egypt and I did some portal work there. And like now I'm connecting with amazing spiritual leaders really internationally. So it's kind of funny how it wasn't a all of this. It was literally breadcrumbs to breadcrumbs. And then every once in a while, like a little bit of my gift came into my awareness, and more and more and more. And so I'm just on a piece of it. It's going to continue and continue and continue. But that's how it began, is just the invitation to that one class.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And even that invitation, like you talk about being given the small enough bites that you could approach them, even that invitation to a class about angels is still connected enough to Christianity
Yes.
that it was palatable and it felt safe enough for you to explore the other sides of of the known, as it were. And such a blessing for sure that your husband was able
Mm-hmm.
to give you the space and support you in following that path, even though it scared the shit out of him from the sounds of it.
Exactly that. It's funny looking back at it, and like talking to you, it kind of came up that it's like really that belief that I know to be true today, that everything shows up in your world at the time that you're supposed to and the time that you meant to. And it doesn't show up in your world unless you're ready for it. And so I didn't like connect
Mhm.
it until talking to you right now, that it's like, oh my gosh, like, of course I could do all those things that were being put in front of me because it showed up in my world. So it was meant to be for me to
Mhm.
experience.
Mhm. I'm so curious if your husband has come along a little bit on this journey with you, or because this is something that a lot of spiritual women struggle with, is navigating a relationship where they are connected to spirit, to source, to other, to this world of energy, and their husbands remain rather firmly rooted in the
Yeah.
the known structure, the rational and or faith-based religions.
It would not have surprised me if he did stay where he was at and just continue to support me, but not like dive into it himself, but it is so funny. He has very much of he's an electrician by trade. He does maintenance, and he's doing a maintenance on a very big plant. And earlier this year, he ended up bringing a lady who does Reiki to clear the entire plant. So
Amazing.
it's it's so drastically different. And like him and his other maintenance guys, they have like this shelf for their crystals and things like that, which is just so beautiful. But his journey
I love
is,
that.
isn't it so magical? His journey is very different to mine. And I always look at him for curiosity and just like in admiration, where I am consciously doing the work, and like if I get a breadcrumb, I go down that rabbit hole and discover everything I can about that. Like it's so juicy and like exciting to me. And for him, it feels like there is some resistance to it. And then one day he just decided, and then he's just there. He's just at the same level. He's just caught up. So I feel like in my family structure, I get to be the trailblazer, and then they get to
Mm-hmm.
just be. They get to be and
Mm-hmm.
experience who they are fully in that.
Oh, that's lovely. And yeah, it's a great that's a great visual of the electricians and the tradesmen with their shelf of crystals, because it's
Oh,
so juxtaposed to what our traditional like view
yes.
of especially men in trades, because they are such like heteronormative like
Yeah.
man's man kind of world. And it really points to the fact that being spiritual, being open to energies and the healing powers of crystals, for instance, or just that awareness that there is more than we can know. It's not like one or the other. Just like you
Yeah.
can still be a devout Christian, and you can be in the spiritual woo side of the world. I have a client who is a devout Christian, and yet she worked with me for 6 months, proclaimed witch, like and no issues there.
Yeah.
I talk about the goddess and the earth, and she talks about God, and there's this sense of we're more alike than different, and it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah. I think, and I mean, you're in Alberta, so we very much have a strong trades. Like we know our trades, they
Mhm.
generally look this way, but I think they've looked that way in the past. And so now we have this judgment of like, well, these people like this stuff, and that's what it is.
Mhm.
And these people like this stuff. And you say it perfectly. This has been really coming to me in the last week or two in different forms. Like now we're in the and so we really have to look at
Mhm.
what our judgments and beliefs have been on certain things in the past. Actually, not certain things, all things in the past, and choose it now and look at it, because as we step into the age of Aquarius, it's a new threshold for everyone. So it's all brand new, it's all uncertain, it's all unknown, and we're really creating this beautiful thing from potentially from scratch, where we get to
Mhm.
experience it as like a child, as a newborn, and we get to look at it and release any judgments that we had in the past and really experience the full spectrum of what everything is now, rather than our very linear views that we've had.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. There's a tide shift happening. I'm seeing so much more, and sometimes I'm like, am I in my own echo chamber? Maybe a little bit. The algorithm is real,
Yes,
but
yes.
there does feel like there is this movement towards more openness, more dialogue, more acceptance, like a growing awareness of the judgments that we
Mhm.
hold, and a softening, and that like a desire to kind of work through them, even in industries where traditionally it would have been very like, man up and do your work and shove down your
Yeah.
feelings. We're starting to see even those workplaces bringing in coaches and people to help those folks in those careers better know themselves and take care of themselves as a priority. It's really interesting to see where those little tendrils are starting to trickle in to all the areas of society.
Yeah, it really has. I got challenged in this area this week because something I'm always doing is like looking at my blocks and growing through them because I choose to live a limitless life. So that means it all gets to be rewritten, it all gets to be chosen. And this week I realized I was reaching out to people to talk about an opportunity. And I was like, oh, you know what? That person probably wouldn't be good for this because of their beliefs in that. Or that person probably isn't good for this because this is what they're more into or this is what they have going on. And I was like, whoa, I am totally judging them and deciding for them rather than allowing them to have
Mm,
like that full free will and allowing them to show and decide who they are for themselves. So
yeah.
it's really about like what we're putting out there is what we're getting reflected back. So if I continue to judge that out there, I'll also only be seen in this linear way.
And it's hard to divorce ourselves from that linear thinking. I had an episode a few weeks back called Fuck Descartes. And if you know anything about Descartes, Cartesian logic is this. He's kind of the philosopher who really said, I think that therefore I am. That's his very famous saying,
Okay.
which really divorced our heads from our bodies, our brain from the rest of us. He was of the opinion that we like the rational objective truth mind was the essence of human and really discredited all of the other ways of knowing, all of the connection to our bodies. Bodies were messy and squishy and had passions and and all of these things that couldn't be neatly rationally put into a little box. And so he kind of founded this way of thought that we have through the whole Western world that prizes the rational over the feeling, the intellectual over the emotional, and it is that linear over the cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
which we've all been raised in. So to break free from those linear ways of thinking, to catch ourselves in our own judgment, to rewrite our stories, it's a radical act in a lot of ways and a courageous act. I'm curious if how you first started to do that work yourself. You said you are always looking for your blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that first kind of way of being start to evolve for you?
You know what? I actually know the specific example of this, which is so funny. It was in that first angel class. So there's like no coincidence that I took that opportunity. And it was in something so simple, but I was able to hear that conversation in my head. This was like completely new ground. It all seemed weird, maybe a little bit frightening.
Mhm.
And I had so many questions, but I was so scared to look so dumb because I knew
Mm,
nothing. And so I'm like,
mhm.
I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to look stupid. And then
Right.
thank God I had to pay $400 to be in this class. Thank goodness. And that I really valued the amount that I had to put in. And I was like, no, I paid $400. I am going to ask all the questions and I don't care how dumb I look. And so I put myself out there and got really, it was so uncomfortable for me because my whole life in school, everything, you did everything you could to fit in so that you could survive and have friendships
Yeah.
and all of that. And so right there was the point of breaking that cycle. And so I asked questions, so many questions. And in that class, there were multiple times where the other people in the class were like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked that. I wanted to know, but I just couldn't ask it. And it came up multiple
Mm,
times.
mhm.
And to this day, one of the things that I love is asking questions because it gives me so much clarity, but there's so many times that I also receive back from the other people how much clarity it gives them, whether it's the coach I'm working with, coaches, people I'm coaching with, kind of thing. Like it's
Yeah.
just so much clarity. And so once I had that experience, I was like, okay, what else do we get to question? I remember very clearly being in church and in the homily, the priest started with like kind of a joke. And so what he had said is, the daughter was making a roast. She cut the ends off the roast, put it in the pan, and cooked it. And so the daughter asked, so why do we always cut the ends off the roast? And she's like, well, it's because we've always done it that way. Like my mom did it that way. So she went and asked her grandma, so what is the reason we cut the ends off the roast? She's like, I didn't have a big enough pan.
Right. I think I've heard that one before. I couldn't remember how it ended, but just
Yes.
that, yeah, you're wasting food. You're cutting off perfectly good food, but not questioning why.
Yeah, we've
The
always done it
concern for
because
why.
it's always been done, and not actually
Yeah,
questioning, "Is this actually still relevant in my life?"
yeah,
And so that
yeah.
story
What a
always
great example.
sticks with me because it's like, "Oh, yeah, we're just cutting it off just because we always have."
Mhm, mhm. Like, it's something you gotta do that before you put it in the oven. It's
Not knowing
the
why.
unquestioning.
Yeah,
Yeah, curiosity is such an important and valuable life skill. I think it's such a beautiful way to approach life with that continued curiosity,
yeah,
that almost childlike, right? That you're never afraid of asking the quote unquote stupid question. There truly are not stupid questions. And every time there's a group of folks and somebody has a question, it's a guarantee that at least one other person has the same
yeah,
question.
yeah,
And nobody's going to think, well, and the people who think you're stupid for asking it are the ones who got some serious self judgment going on, right? It's the ones who are the most uncomfortable with themselves who will be in judgment as a protection. And the learning of that as we grow and move has been so helpful for me, being like, I don't care what you think. If you are judging me that hard, like, I'm real sorry for how you must feel in your day to day moving through the world. But it takes a lot of time to come to that place of confidence too.
It does help coming from the place of, if I am willing to be really uncomfortable for a few minutes so it can benefit the collective, I'll do that. And
Mhm,
that's where
mhm,
it's really reflected in that small example into my life now, because I'm doing things that are way more uncomfortable that I couldn't even imagine I was the person to do those things. Way more uncomfortable.
mhm.
But now I'm like, okay, this is for the global ascension, the global consciousness. Like, this is so much bigger than me,
Yeah.
but I get to lead in that discomfort, and that's okay.
Yes, the piece of being in service, which is
Yes.
what brings so many coaches, healers. That's why we are here. That's why we do the work we do, is because we have a desire to help
Yeah,
not just our clients, but make a ripple like that initial breadcrumb or pebble in the pond, making a ripple outwards in our own lives. We want to be able to spread that to others as well.
exactly. Can I go into my childlike curiosity and ask you a question?
Yes, you can.
While we have the platform, you had shared,
Yeah.
I've listened to your podcast, and you share that you're a slow living witch. Now, my
Mhm.
perspective of witches are still rooted in like that childlike fear. I don't have the same fear, but like, witches are dark, witches have ill intention,
Mhm.
witches have that very prehistoric version of the witch. And it came up in a conversation with a friend the other day. And I found it so interesting because I'm like, I've had a chance to meet some witches actually in the last few months, you being one of them. And I was like,
Mhm.
they're nothing but kind and generous and serving. And so I'm like, something about the two is wrong. So can
Mhm.
you tell me what
Yeah.
that means?
Yes, I can. I can. So, I mean, it's a story of patriarchy and Christianity in a lot of ways, and push for power in the Middle Ages in Europe, when the old white dudes, isn't it always, were really wanting to consolidate their power over the folks living in Europe. And one of the ways that they chose to do that was by demonizing the women who were the power holders, the women who were the hubs of the community, the wise women, the healers. You know, these dudes over in their big buildings, they'd be like, "You must obey, you must pay taxes," and they were all like, but you don't have any power to help me. Like, the church doesn't have any power to heal me. This woman over here has healed me. She's caught my babies. She's given me good advice when my husband and I were having a hard time. Like, this is still where the power lies, is with the women, with the wise women. And some men too. It wasn't just women who were persecuted, but the idea of the witch as an evildoer, nasty woman, somebody who has ill intention, was really created in order to wrest power away from the people and away from the communities and put it into the hands of the few, the rich, wealthy landowners and the church. And so it's been perpetuated down through the years. Hollywood's done a number on us, that's for sure.
Yes.
And in just like carrying on that story of the green, warty, broomstick wielding, I mean, we do use brooms because they're cleansing. Just symbolic cleansing there. But we don't fly on them, although that would be great if we could.
Right.
when I first claimed the title, my mom was like, could you use a different word? And I was like, no, because for me, I could say midwife, which I was for years. I could say wise woman. I could say healer. I could say, elder or knowledge keeper or community center, but all of those words are encapsulated by the meaning of witch. So it's kind of a reclamation. It's like we're taking that word back.
I like that you chose the word witch because it will cause a visceral reaction in people.
Yeah.
So like it's not something like, oh, interesting, you're a wise woman, but like you're a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, how do I feel about that? How do I like put the version of who I think that is versus the person I'm actually seeing in front of me? And it's like, hey, there's a disconnect. Where was the lie that I believed, or where was the story that I believed that's not actually true? Like, I can see how you using that word in such a powerful way can have people having their own experience and journey.
Yeah, it is triggering for many, and it'll repel lots too, but it is a really good way to help, for me, attract those who are like, ooh, I don't know about, but I'm still curious, and they're leaning in, versus the ones who are just like, no. And I'm like, well, we were never going to work well together anyways. Like, we were never until you do some of your own journeying, and that might not be in this lifetime. It's a really good way to kind of create a little bit of, that juxtaposition between like push-pull, curiosity. It opens curiosity for people too. It's a discussion point, certainly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing and like entertaining my curiosity on that, because like when you're sharing, like it's how it's like the old white dudes and like how they were like really flexing their power, and anything that seemed empowered, anything that seemed like they could lose their power because it would give people free thinking and their free way of being.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting because we're seeing that right now.
Yeah, we really are, actually. As you were speaking, like, it's not really any different than the fear and the divisiveness that's being sowed right now, especially in our neighbors to the south, but also here. This is pitting one another against each other. It destabilizes the society. It makes us far less able to enact change, to stand up for what we want. If we're afraid of our neighbors, and that's really what happened during the burning times in Europe, was that you were afraid to speak your mind because you might get called a witch and be either cast out of society, which was basically a death sentence, or actually killed by burning or hanging or whatever other method. And you were afraid to confide in anybody. You didn't trust your neighbors. You might rat your neighbor out for something so that they wouldn't rat you out. Like, there's all of this kind of fear-mongering and divisiveness being fostered. And it's very similar to what's happening in our political sphere.
Yeah.
Not just the States and Canada, but quite globally these days, where we have this really, again, black and white way of thinking.
It's so beautiful that it is so black and white right now, in my opinion, because once we've all been through COVID, now we see things in a little bit of a different way. So having things so starkly, this is black, this is white, people are no longer seeing the world like that. And so it's like you said, by claiming the title of witch, it makes them think, it's like, no, like not everything is all one thing. Same with our media painting everything. It's all black, all white. It's able to really make it so obvious for us to be like, hey, even if we don't know what's off, we're like, hey, something is off here, and I need to figure out what works for me and what's resonating with me right now.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like that push towards, we're still well too much in the black and white. But many of us are opening to that, like, no, it can't be this way. Like nature's not black and white and we are of nature. There's no such thing as evil and good. There's shades of intention in between.
Well, and if we keep going down this path, it's so funny because that black and white is really going to look like cartoons. It's going to look so
Right.
cartoony because it's like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like all of these people are this exact way. None of those people are any different. There's no singular thought. And like all of these people are this way. And it really just looks like caricatures. It's not actually the reality that we're experiencing.
It's a great visual for how how that plays out in our lives. I'm curious if this kind of, I mean, black and white thinking is something that comes up for many of us, again, because we've been raised to kind of have that as a foundation. Is this something that, I'm just tying it back into your work and what you do with folks these days. When you are working with a client, perhaps who has this black and white view of the world or way of thinking, how do you like to help them see the shades of gray?
Curiosity. It is given the invitation to allow them to be curious, to allow them to explore. Because if we're living in that black and white, generally it was because we were told not to question it. Like, this is the reality, and that's just the way it is. This is who we are. This is how we act. This is who we associate with. Like, these are the rules about how we apply ourselves in life. And so I think one of the first things that we have to do is get into a place of curiosity, because that way we can begin to explore new topics without feeling any danger or fear for safety of ourselves. Because that's what fear and ego's job is to do, is to really show us where we're like pushing out of our comfort zone and where there might be something that could harm us. And our body and our mind is experiencing this as physical harm. And so if we're experiencing that, we're going to be like, no, I'm not going there. I'm not touching it. Right here is where I know. Right here is where I'm comfortable. Right here is where I'm going to stay. And so it's about creating that really safe container to begin with, especially as you're beginning this exploration, because your whole reality and your beliefs of things are going to shift. So you're going to become someone that you don't recognize currently. And the thought of your entire world changing is terrifying, because it's like, what's going to stay? What am I going to lose? It feels like a death, because it'll be a death of your current self and your way of being, and a rebirth into who you're meant to be in that empowerment. But when we're in that experience, we're only experiencing the death part. We're only feeling that. And so I definitely always want to really recognize the experience that it takes to go through those stages, to become in that empowered self, to really embrace the feeling of like choosing to live a limitless life. And like, by knowing that discomfort, it's about getting into the curious, like, what would this feel like? Or is this really true if this happened? And really get curious. If I chose this, what would it look like? What potentially could it look like? And you can go down that rabbit holes and really explore. And so that's always, I think, such a beautiful first step. And then it does get to go into decision, choice, action. But that's where we get to start.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that. The power of curiosity. Again, I had a whole episode kind of centered around curiosity with a guest who's very much, she's taught me a lot about curiosity. And because it feels childlike in a lot of ways, when we think about the word curious, I often think about kids. It feels a little bit more lighthearted and safe than that, like, okay, let's change the narrative, let's change the story. All of that work is important too, but that playfulness and that the gentleness that curiosity brings with it, that word it's a great one for sure.
Yeah.
I am curious. You said that you started the path that you're on now in terms of working with folks online, teaching online. I know that you bring people together. You're a great collaborator as well. But you started doing braiding hair videos on YouTube, I assume?
Yeah.
And how did you move from a hairdresser to this amazing energy coach that you are now? I want to know a little bit more about that as we move towards the end of the
Well,
episode.
I will say it didn't have to do with me. I was definitely having so much support from the unknown or like source through it, because it wasn't a path that I would have put myself on or would have even allowed myself to have that, or like expected, like, oh, who am I to have that?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I started teaching moms how to braid. I like made this big course and I started promoting it locally, kind of thing. And then I came across a coach who was teaching how to do summits and bundles to grow your list, to grow your business, to give
Mm.
more of that masculine structure that I didn't have. And so I was
Mhm.
like, oh, what is the summit I can teach? I'm like, oh, raising cheeky girls, the working mom way. And then those are the people who are going to need to know how to braid their daughter's hair, obviously. And so
Right.
it's funny because you and I actually met through my bundle, the Intuitive Entrepreneur Bundle. And so I
Mhm.
can put my journey through the names of the bundles that I've hosted, because after
Yeah.
every one, I was able to polish and gain more clarity of like, oh, no, not this. Yes, this. So it went from Raising Cheeky Girls, the working mom way, to the Working Mom series, because I realized that, like, oh, okay, yeah, those working moms are my people, to women, empowering women. And then it basically got to a point where in the last summit, it was like, hey, I want to keep hosting with the lady I was hosting with. But none of the inspiration was coming, nothing was coming up. And so I was like, one of my friends is like, why aren't you doing it completely on like intuition, that stuff? That's what you talk about all the time. That's what you're doing. And so that's when the bundle that I hosted with you, that was my first time, like very publicly, very vocally coming out as like the Intuitive Entrepreneur Bundle was the bundle. So that was me coming out as like, hey, I can help people this way. I can serve people this way. I've been doing the work and polishing my gifts for years, but I was in that like hiding in the closet still.
Right. Yeah. Oh, very cool. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you said. Like, we've talked about curiosity and really that childlike feeling. Children are so good at joy. And so
Mhm.
I want to bring that in before we wrap up this call for sure, because this is something I've been receiving so clearly for the year of 2025. And 2025 is the year of joy, which,
Mm.
oh, doesn't that feel so good?
Mhm. Yeah, it really does. It feels like very needed.
Yes. And it's not always as kind as like it sounds. So when we talk about the year of joy, what that gets to look like is we have to ask those questions again to ourselves. Like, what are the conversations we're having? What are the thoughts that we're having? Are we prioritizing joy? Where are we not? What gets to shift so that we can? So it's partially has
Mhm.
to do with cleaning house so that you do make more space for joy. Your business projects you're taking on, they're lighting you up. They're like, oh my gosh, yes, let's go, let's do this. And so, yeah, it's just so exciting in that way, that gets to be,
Mhm.
because I feel like we've been in a squeeze for so long, and next year it will be a squeeze still, but we're being told that joy is our focus and our frequency that we really get to tap into. So that means we
Mhm.
have a really clear North Star. So we don't feel like we're going quite as blind as we have been.
Right. And you have an offering to help folks with following that joy, finding that joy as we move into 2025. Do you not?
I do. Actually, it's interesting. I created this summer and not even realizing that this was what next year was going to be, not realizing why I was making it, but I just knew I received the download like, hey, this is what we're making right now. And so it's the Frequency of
Mm.
Joy Challenge, of course. And it's 5 days of really giving yourself permission to tap into joy. So I know sometimes challenges, it can feel like another thing to do. It can feel like a lot on your plate. This is really about every day you'll receive a different thing that has you tapping into that joy. And they're very silly things that will shake you out of old beliefs. It's like, oh, one of the fun things that I did is like making pancake art. Like, it can be messy,
Mm.
it can be horrible, but it's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense to make time to do that. But
Right.
it's giving you the opportunity to be like, wait, why aren't I making time for these things? How is it making me feel?
That play
That
aspect coming
play.
into it.
Yes, joy is so closely tied with playfulness. And
Mhm.
even when you talk about joy, or even when you say the word playfulness, you can feel your energy amplifying so much. And there's almost like an acceleration, there's a giddiness, there's an excitement. And then you're tapping into possibilities, like
Yeah.
all the
Yeah, and
possible
creativity.
creativity. Exactly. If you actually look at the emotions on the scale for frequency, joy is the third highest. It is above love, which
Wow. Never knew
surprised me.
that.
No, it completely surprised me.
What's number 1?
Okay, the number one is empowerment, and number two is peace.
Ah,
So it can sometimes feel hard to
lovely.
feel peace, and empowerment can sometimes feel a little fleeting. But joy is one like,
Mhm.
I can do that. But we have to give
Mhm.
ourselves permission to let go of all the reasons why we can't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a key word there is that permission piece. I talk a lot about permission to rest. That's a lot of what the work I do is around rest and taking the time for ourselves, but rest can be playful too. There can be an element sometimes what we need to recharge or refuel is that element of play or joy because joy recharges us in a really beautiful way. So how do folks listening who are curious about this challenge, how do they jump into it with you?
Okay, so I'm going to share the link with you so you have it as well. So it'll be underneath the
Mhm.
video. But also, you can go to my website at JanineHauck.com and it'll be right on my website so you can hop in. So it's easy. It feels joyful to sign up, even because it's so simple. And then you get to start the challenge and not take yourself too seriously. And one of the things that I like to say is like, what could it hurt to try this for a week? What could it hurt to just be
Mhm.
playful for a week? And then we're tapping into the curiosity. It's not asking you to do these huge life changes, but it's like just play and see, and then
Mhm.
see how it feels with you. See how the results that you're seeing in all areas of your life are. And you will notice a difference.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. I would definitely encourage everybody who's listening to head on over to Janine's website and sign up for the frequency of joy. Is there anything else that you want to share with us to leave us with? Any last little words of wisdom before we say goodbye?
I think going into 2025, the best thing to tell you is just like, don't take life so seriously. There are opportunities that are meant for you in your lifetime that you cannot miss, but everything in between, play. You can't miss
Mhm.
the big things that are meant for you. So just enjoy the ride. Really just be present in the experience and just be in the gratitude of what is all there.
Lovely. Yeah. And you radiate that joy, that presence. There's a there's a shine to you that definitely comes from living what you teach and what you share with the world. So thank you so much for being here with me. It's been a pleasure to chat. I'm sure we could talk for hours as is the case with pretty much all my guests. Like, we could just keep going. And I definitely look forward to collaborating with you in the future. For everybody listening in, as always, the links to join will be in the show notes. Everything that you need to get a hold of Janine, if you're curious to learn more or connect with her, will be down there. And I will be back here same time next week with you. And I don't know if I'm going to have another guest. I never seem to know. We don't know. Regardless, you'll be hearing from me on Monday. Thanks so much, Woo Crew. If you like this episode, leave a rating, a review. It really helps get us discovered and share with your friends. And I will see you next week. Bye for now.